It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the Heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, we're back on the podcast and in from the campaign trail once again. The Des Moines Register and AARP are holding a series of events around Iowa this week with the presidential candidates talking about issues of interest to seniors. And the topics are what you might expect with seniors. I mean, they're all up about those drug prices and Medicare and Social Security and other things as well. We'll get to some of those also. But the main topics are there for you. And the candidates that were in Des Moines at the alma mater, Drake University, at the Olmsted Center this week, were Cory Booker, John Hickenlooper, Amy Klobuchar, and Joe Biden. And I'll start off here by reading a little backgrounder, which I think is kind of interesting. The locations this week around Iowa are Cedar Rapids, Council Bluffs, Davenport, Des Moines, where I was at for the first one, and then in Sioux City. There are 19 Democratic presidential candidates that have agreed to participate in the forums. Each candidate had only 25 minutes, and they made him stick to it pretty closely, so that wasn't too bad, to answer questions from the moderators and the audience. And the AARP and Des Moines Register and Radio Iowa, they had some interesting statistics to start us off with. I guess these are actually from AARP. You may not know this, but in the 2018, the off-season election, the midterms, the national exit polls showed that 50-plus voters made up 56% of the votes in the election and 60% of the votes in Iowa. Now, voters that were age 50-plus cast a majority of ballots and cited health care as their most important issue. And 50-plus voters remain concerned about the future of health insurance for those with pre-existing conditions, prescription drug prices, the future of Medicare, and Social Security. In 2016, the presidential election, 55% of the electorate was age 50 and up, and older voters topped 50% in every one of the states where voter file data was available. Now, this kind of taps into this situation with winning an election as far as the Democrats are concerned. You recognize that this is your base, this is the electorate, these are the people that vote, and you go after them and try to get their vote and try to defeat Donald Trump in the general, or do you look at that and go, my God, there's a part of the electorate that is untapped. There's a gold mine out there of people that are not participating, and they're mostly younger, and they're mostly not interested in these issues. They might be interested in health care a little bit because they need it and want it. They're interested in issues like loan forgiveness for the public institutions, and they're also interested in things like not having to go get their asses shot off in foreign wars. Hello, Tulsi Gabbard. Well, my belief is there's a huge opportunity there for all of us on the left side of the political spectrum in the Democratic Party. But the candidates that I mentioned that were there today, they're a little bit to the left and progressive. Booker, notably, and Klobuchar can be. Biden, not so much, and I don't think Hickenlooper is either. And one of the ways that you know that this was borne out is that they didn't want to talk much about Medicare for all. They're for some form of a public option, or universal health care, or Obamacare. Biden is still preaching Obamacare, and that's mostly to this older constituency. And I don't know, to tell you the truth. That underwhelmed as an issue, as a winning issue in 2016, and I don't know if that's the way to go in 2020 or not. But one of the issues that I was most concerned about, and this is a concern of my wife too, and she's always brought this up. It takes a little while for me to understand it. Maybe I can explain it here so that everybody can. But a lot of folks don't know that when it comes to the Social Security tax that you pay, you only pay that up to $132,000. If you're an upper income earner in this country, above $132,000, you don't pay Social Security tax. And of course, everybody's concerned, and a big issue at the forum that I attended. Everybody's concerned about the solvency of Social Security. How do we keep it around? How do we keep it funded? They've raided it. They've borrowed from it. It's endangered, could run out of money or start running out of money in, 10, 15, 20 years, something like that. Well, as my wife likes to say again, it can be solvent until Jesus comes if they just make those upper income earners pay at the same rate that the lower income earners do. Everybody above $132,000, you keep paying up to Jeff Bezos with Amazon. All of that money goes into the Medicaid fund, and we're good. But the candidates at the forum in Des Moines weren't for eliminating that cap entirely. They were for adjusting it, lifting it, raising it, some modification of a complete elimination of the cap. Let's start off with Cory Booker talking about exactly that when questioned about lifting that tax, that income cap for Social Security. Here's Cory Booker.
Right, and so this is another thing that people tell you, that Social Security is broken and it's not viable. And I just simply say this: look, we are a nation that believes fundamentally in fairness. And so why should somebody who's making $70,000 a year, a family that's making $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 a year, pay so much more in terms of percentage of their income in Social Security taxes than someone who's making $5 million a year? Social Security is a regressive tax hurting working class Americans, and then we cry poverty that we don't have the resources to keep it solvent. If I am your president, I'm going to say we're going to make this tax far more just and fair, and that the highest earners in this country are going to have to pay more. We're going to have to lift the cap, and it'll affect a very small percentage of people in order to be able to not only make Social Security solvent, but this is the thing that really worries me. Here in Iowa, across our country, there are millions of seniors who've worked hard all of their lives and are being stripped of their dignity because their Social Security checks are so meager that they are below the poverty line. We need to be a country that values the dignity of all people, and a simple adjustment for high-income earners affecting a very small percentage of our country would not only fix Social Security, but it would elevate the salaries, as I will do, elevate the income, the Social Security checks of all Americans so that everyone can retire with dignity and security.
I want to be clear. One of your competitors have said completely eliminate the cap. You would raise it rather than eliminate it.
I would raise the cap for the highest income earners. I think that's all that we need to do. That alone would allow me to do my two goals, which is make it solvent for generations to come, and take so many of the people that we have right now who are below the poverty line, at the poverty line, or a little bit above. It would be able to give a boost and expansion of benefits for millions and millions of American seniors, giving them what we all should have in our retirement, which is security and dignity.
Well, so there you have it. That's Cory Booker talking about one of those critical issues, and that's that tax cap for Social Security purposes. Now, next up was John Hickenlooper. Now, he's the former governor of Colorado, and, one of the main points that he always brings up is he was able to unify people. He was able to reach across the blue and red parts of Colorado and governor that state, until he couldn't anymore. I mean, he had a lot of success out there doing that. Now, with some of these candidates like Hickenlooper, I look at him and think, well, yeah, you were the governor of a state that hasn't lost its mind yet. Colorado would fall into that category. Klobuchar also makes that point very forcibly, although, they had Michelle Bachmann and a lot of problems up there in Minnesota. Minnesota's not completely nuts yet. Inslee is the same way up in Washington State, and they were able to bring people together and get reelected and get some things done up there. I don't know if that's true with the rest of the country or not. I don't know if they're going to be able to transfer that success to the United States of America. Here's John Hickenlooper.
What I learned in the restaurant business is people have to feel heard. And oftentimes you have to repeat back to them their exact words that they're using for them to feel validated and heard. And once you begin doing that, oftentimes a strange transformation happens because you're saying their words, and by saying them, you hear the words in a different place, and suddenly you begin to get a little bit of trust. And I tease my staff, once you begin to get a little bit of trust, you begin to be able to collaborate. And I tease my staff that we collaborate at the speed of trust. And Many people have told me that, well, it worked for the environmentalists and the oil and gas. It's never going to work in Washington.
Well, you got to love it. I mean, the guy made his fame and fortune not in politics, but in the restaurant business, in the brew pub business, in the golden state of Colorado. He knows all about beer. I don't know. There was a time when I thought I did too. Probably knew too much. That's why I don't drink it anymore. But that's John Hickenlooper. I don't know. I wished he was right. I hope that would be correct, that it's just simply a matter that all that have gone before him and all of those people in Congress just aren't able to negotiate. They're not able to collaborate. They're not able to compromise. And he can, because he's had past experience doing that. But I don't know. I just find that hard to believe. And he's, Mitch McConnell, my God, how do you collaborate or compromise with the turtlehead? I mean, he's talking about people. I'm not so sure Mitch McConnell, he doesn't look like a person. He looks like a turtle. So I don't know if he can compromise with that dude or not. But good on you, John. I hope you can. But if he were able to do that, I'm not so sure that it would fit my point of view, because he's a moderate. I mean, he's a moderate to a conservative Democrat in his views, and he's going to start his compromise, his negotiation, smack dab in the middle of where the Republicans are at. And they're probably not going to give very much, if at all. So what you're going to end up with is a conservative right-wing point of view. It reminds me of Keith Olbermann. He used to say all the time, why must you begin your negotiation in the middle of your opponent's position? If you do that, you're never going to get what you want. And that's my point for 2020. Let's not do that. Let's start left. Let's gain some power. Let's get some seats. Let's get the White House and start off on the far left. Let's start with Medicare for all as an example, and then compromise if we have to going to universal health care or a public option. I hope we don't have to, but let's not start there, because if we start there, we'll negotiate and compromise and end up with something like Obamacare. And that ain't working, folks. I don't think that's the answer. Well, next up on Podcast by George at Drake University, the Olmsted Center. It was a great event, and it was well done, and kudos to the people at Drake University. The Olmsted Center is getting kind of aged right now. It's funny to me because it was brand spanking new when I started there. I spent a lot of time shooting pool down in the rec room. I probably should have spent more time cracking the books. But I was back on campus, back in the Olmsted Center, and in a press gaggle, listening to folks like Hickenlooper and Amy Klobuchar. One thing about her speech that stood out to me, and again, nobody was going quite to Medicare for all. They didn't want to get that dramatic. But one thing that I've talked about in the past, and I love it when this comes out with some of these politicians, every now and then they track right with you. And what I've said is, in the past, when it comes to the issue of immigration, it's directly linked to the aging of America, to long-term health care. How? Who's going to take care of you? Who's going to work in these nursing homes? We need to think about that when it comes to the immigration issue. You want to run all these people out of the country? You want to close them out? You want to just let them trickle in? All right, well, if you do that, who's going to milk your cows? Who's going to pick your broccoli? Who's going to empty your bedpan, Charles Grassley? Well, it's going to be the immigrant population. I mean, these people, they're not too good to do that kind of work. Some of them are happy to do that kind of work, and they're good at it. Are your kids going to do that? Are your grandchildren going to empty your bedpans? I don't think they're going to. Are they going to milk your cows? Are they going to take care of your livestock? I don't think they're going to. They're probably going to be some guys from south of the border. They're good at that. They know how to do it, and they like doing it. Why the hell would you want to close them out and run them out of the country? But Amy Klobuchar has picked up on this, and I've been saying it for a long time. And this is the first presidential candidate that I've heard make this direct connection between immigration and the needs of the elderly. Here's Amy Klobuchar.
Last thing is comprehensive immigration reform. In Minnesota, this is just one example, and you've seen this in Iowa, other places, we have a Liberian community that is here legally, but they're here on temporary status. And for decades, they have been working in our nursing homes and in our hospitals, and yet this administration, we're just a few days away from deporting all of them, people who had been here for decades. And you've seen that time and time again, whether they're dreamers, whether they are people who have been here working for years. And that would go a long way. I would add to it work that I've done and that I would continue as president. When people come here to study nursing or to study to be a doctor in Iowa or in Minnesota, there's a lot of them that come from other countries. Instead of forcing them to go back and do their residency where they were, there's a bill that actually I lead the reauthorization of, which says, you know what, you could actually work in a rural area, underserved rural area, or underserved urban area, and then you won't have to go back to do your residency. And it's a great way to get workers in these places. And so what I hate that's going on right now is that we all know that immigrants work in a number of our healthcare facilities, right? They're a major part of our economy. And we should start talking about that, the economic need for immigration reform, instead of where the president keeps wanting us to go. Because that security at the border, incredibly important. And the way you help pay for it is with comprehensive immigration reform, which brings the deficit down by $158 billion in 10 years. And then you also get workers that can help us, in addition to training the workers I talked about, which will make a big difference for our workforce so our seniors can continue to be taken care of.
Well, that was Amy Klobuchar, whip smart, always in command of statistics and information, and I think she's spot on a lot of things, and particularly the looming large need in this country to take care of all the old gummers that are out walking around getting ready to head for the nursing homes. Who's going to do that? Who's going to take care of this largest population to cross the threshold into Sippy Cupville that's ever existed in this country? Well, immigrants are going to have to do some of that work, so let's keep them on board here. Let's be nice to those folks, because you're going to someday have an immigrant probably as your primary caretaker. Well, you're going to anyway, because we're all immigrants, but you know what I mean. I thought that was an excellent point, and I wanted to get that on there. Let's wrap it up now. Let's go to the last speaker, Big Joe Biden, former Vice President, Secretary of State, former U.S. Senator. I have issues with Joe Biden. You've heard me say that before on this podcast, and first and foremost is that Iraq war. And there's a gaggle afterwards, a press gaggle, and I was going to go off topic and grab a microphone and ask him specifically how that happened. How did he vote for that ill-fated war in Iraq? And what's to say, if he were to gain re-election to the White House, that something like that wouldn't happen again? I mean, I'm once bitten, twice shy when it comes to that. Now, I think I know what Joe Biden would say, and I think I know what his defenders would say. They'd say that he voted to authorize action, but it was to be executed with some certain parameters by George Bush, which he didn't adhere to. Well, I don't know. That's almost as dumb as voting for the war itself. You don't turn over the controls to something like that to George W. Bush. I'm sorry, but that just ain't happening. I'm not buying that explanation. But I wanted to hear his explanation on that topic, but he didn't come to the press gaggle. But what he did talk about during his part of the forum was reviving, improving Obamacare. I have some sympathy for that because it doesn't bear any resemblance to what it was originally intended to be, and he worked on it. He was there at the time. He knows what it's supposed to be. He knows what it could be. But by the way that he frames the argument, talking about if you want to keep your insurance that you currently have, you can. Oh, boy. Remember that? I mean, they're still being lit up over that because they said if you wanted to keep your doctor, you could, and that turned out not to be true, and there were some problems with Obamacare. Again, not Obama's problem or not his fault necessarily, but Obamacare does have some issues, and it's because of the way that it had to be watered down and how it had to be compromised, and what we ended up with. Again, we started in the middle with Obamacare, and we went right, and we compromised with the Republicans, and what you see is what you get today. But here's Joe Biden before we end today talking about his solution for health care for seniors and for everyone, really. And it's not Medicare for all. It's not universal health care per se. It's Obamacare, fixed. Here's Joe Biden.
What I would do immediately is restore all the cuts that have been made and then provide a public option. Let me explain how the public option works. How many of you have, when you were working, liked your, and you may still be working, many of you, how many of you like your employer-based health care? Did you think it was adequate? Now, if I come along and say, finish, you can't have it anymore. Well, that's what Medicare for All does. You cannot have it, period. Number one. There's a hiatus spot in between, by the way, how long it's going to take. So I give people the option. If you like your health care plan, your employer-based plan, you can keep it. If, in fact, you have private insurance, you can keep it. If you have no insurance at all, you are in the exchange, or, in fact, you can buy into the Medicare-like exchange. That is the add-on to Obamacare. And so what it would do, it would cost about, to get to the end, because I always like to know how much things are going to cost, it would cost about $750 billion over 10. Not $3 trillion, but $750 billion. It would get 99.9% coverage. Anyone who had anyone eligible for Medicaid would automatically be enrolled in this option for no cost in the exchange. And everyone's numbers would be reduced in terms of cost to get into the exchange.